Realizing you've passed the exact same glowing neon exit 44 sign 4 times in a row on a deserted midnight highway is deeply unsettling. But your heart completely stops when your headlights illuminate your own empty, crashed car on the shoulder with a tall, faceless shadow figure standing over the shattered windshield. My name is Kalen Drake, and in the late autumn of 2024, I was driving solo across the rugged, empty expanse of eastern Oregon on my way to Idaho. It was well past 1 a.m., and the state highway was entirely vacant. A lonely two-lane ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through miles of towering, silent pine forests. There were no streetlights, no oncoming headlights, and the thick, suffocating darkness of the Pacific Northwest wilderness pressed heavily against the windows of my old sedan. The only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of my tires against the road and the faint, crackling static of a local radio station that had lost its signal hours ago. I was fighting off waves of exhaustion, desperately looking for a gas station or a rest stop, when I first noticed the neon green sign emerging from the dark. Exit 44, local access 1 mile. I didn't think much of it and continued driving forward at a steady 60 miles per hour. But exactly 10 minutes later, my high beams illuminated the exact same green reflective sign. Exit 44, local access 1 mile. My brow furrowed in mild confusion. I assumed my tired mind was playing tricks on me, or perhaps the highway department had installed twin signs close together. I shook my head, turned the air conditioning to maximum to blast cold air into my face, and kept my eyes locked on the asphalt ahead. Then, it happened a third time. 10 minutes later, the identical sign flashed under my headlights. A cold drop of sweat rolled down my spine. The highway was completely straight. There were no exit ramps, no intersections, and no physical way for me to be driving in a circle. It felt as if the fabric of physical reality had glitched, trapping my car in an endless, looping pocket of space. Shaking with a sudden surge of adrenaline, I reached for my smartphone mounted on the dashboard to check the GPS. The screen was completely dead, the digital display flashing a single, distorted message across a background of gray pixels. Route recalculating. Outside known grid, panic, sharp and icy, took complete control of my rational mind. I decided that the very next time I saw that exit sign, I was pulling off the highway no matter where it led. I waited, counting the agonizing seconds in the dark. Exactly 10 minutes later, like clockwork, the sign appeared. I slammed on my brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt, and turned the steering wheel sharply onto the narrow, unpaved exit ramp. The ramp was surrounded by dense, overgrown briars that scraped violently against the sides of my car as I descended into a pitch-black valley. The ramp didn't lead to a town or service road. It fed right back onto the main two-lane highway. My heart violently hammered against my ribs. I was trapped, but as my car glided back onto the main road, my high beams caught a large, dark shape resting on the gravel shoulder about 50 yards ahead. I slowed down, my foot trembling on the brake pedal. It was a vehicle. As I crept closer, the details came into sharp, horrifying focus. It was a silver sedan, the front hood completely wrapped around a massive pine tree, smoke pouring from the crushed radiator. It was the exact same make, model, and color as my own car, down to the specific dent on the rear bumper and the unique stickers on the back window. I stopped my car 20 feet away, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The interior of the wrecked car was completely dark, the driver's side door thrown wide open. But what made my soul completely leave my body was the figure standing directly in front of the shattered windshield. It was an impossibly tall, skeletal silhouette, blacker than the surrounding night, wearing what looked like a tattered, dark trench coat. It didn't possess a human face. Where its features should have been, there was only a shifting, fluid void of absolute darkness that seemed to absorb the light from my high beams. The entity slowly turned its head toward my idling car. At that exact microsecond, my car's digital radio console burst to life at maximum volume. The speakers let out a deafening, metallic screech of audio static, layered with a wet, rattling gasp that perfectly replicated my own voice from a voice note I had sent to my brother earlier that evening. "I don't think I'm going to make it home tonight, man. The road, it doesn't end." The radio voice wept, its cadence distorted and pitched down into a mechanical, demonic drone. The tall shadow figure began to move toward me. It didn't walk. Its form shifted and glitched across the gravel shoulder like a skipping frame in a corrupted video file, moving with an impossible, jerky speed that covered 10 yards in a single blink. Primal survival instinct exploded through my paralysis. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, the engine roaring as my sedan fishtailed across the gravel and bolted down the empty highway. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I kept my eyes locked forward, watching the speedometer needle climb to 80, then 90 miles per hour. The pine trees on either side of the road blurred into a solid wall of black. 10 minutes passed in a blur of pure terror. And then the green sign appeared again, exit 44. But this time the shadow figure was standing directly beneath the metal signpost, its elongated arm raised, pointing its jagged finger straight at my windshield. As I roared past it, a sudden, catastrophic drop in temperature hit the interior of my car. My breath formed a thick white plume in the air, and frost instantly spiderwebbed across the inside of the glass, reducing my visibility to zero. I slammed on the brakes, but the tires lost traction on the sudden layer of black ice that had formed over the asphalt. The car spun violently out of control, rotating 3 times before sliding sideways off the shoulder and plunging into the dark ravine. The impact was a deafening crunch of metal and shattering glass. I woke up 20 minutes later, coughing through a cloud of white smoke from the deployed airbag. My legs were pinned beneath the crushed dashboard, and my ribs burned with an agonizing pain. I was trapped in the wreckage. Through the shattered remains of the driver's side window, I looked out into the freezing night. The silence of the forest was absolute. Then I heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The heavy, uneven sound of footsteps dragging through the gravel shoulder above me. I looked up through the broken glass. Descending the slope of the ravine, its fluid silhouette blending with the shadows of the pines, was the tall entity. It was moving slowly now, savoring the final moments of the trap. I closed my eyes, clenching my teeth, and waited for the end as the temperature around my face dropped to absolute zero. I don't know how, but I survived. A passing highway patrol officer found my wreckage at 6 a.m., the looping loop finally breaking with the dawn. The police told me my car had crashed hours ago, but they couldn't explain the large, frozen, 3-toed handprints pressed deeply into the metal of my trunk lid. I never drive at night anymore, and whenever I see a green highway exit sign on a lonely road, my throat chokes with an absolute dread because I know that somewhere out there, the loop is always waiting to close. Scrolling through a decade-old Reddit thread about a haunted Midwestern rental house is a fun way to pass a lonely midnight shift, until you click on the attached anonymous image link and find a live, high-definition photo of your own bedroom, taken from inside the dark crawl space directly behind your headboard, time-stamped less than 2 minutes ago. My name is Garrett Brooks, and in the summer of 2025, I leased a cheap, isolated 2-story farmhouse located on the rural outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. The house was structurally sound but incredibly old, featuring peeling wallpaper, creaking floorboards, and a small, unsettling wooden hatch in the wall of the master bedroom that led to an unlit, uninsulated crawl space running the length of the roofline. Because the property was surrounded entirely by miles of dark cornfields and had no close neighbors, the silence at night was incredibly heavy, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the dry stalks outside. It was exactly 2:22 a.m. on a stormy Tuesday when I was lying in bed, unable to sleep due to the distant rolling thunder. To pass the time, I opened a Reddit app on my phone and began browsing through an old, obscure subreddit dedicated to local urban legends and real-world hauntings. As I scrolled through the deep archives, a specific thread title from 9 years ago caught my eye. The Shadow in the Drywall, Avoid Route 9 Rental. My breath caught in my throat. My house was located directly on Route 9. With a shaking thumb, I tapped on the thread and began to read the detailed post written by a user named u/hidden. The original poster detailed how they had rented the exact same farmhouse in 2016 and had begun experiencing severe supernatural anomalies. They wrote about sudden, violent drops in temperature, the sound of rhythmic scratching coming from inside the drywall directly behind the bed, and an intense, overwhelming feeling of being watched by a malicious presence through the small crawlspace hatch. The post concluded with a terrifying warning. It doesn't stay in the walls. It watches you sleep, learning your face, until it decides to take your place. A wave of nervous paranoia washed over me. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself that every old farmhouse had urban legends attached to it. But then I noticed a comment at the very bottom of the thread, posted by an anonymous account just 2 minutes prior. The comment contained no text, only a single hyperlink labeled live_update.png. Curiosity overrode my better judgment. Tapping the link redirected me to an external image hosting site. The web page took a few seconds to load, the pixels slowly filling the screen from top to bottom. When the image finally cleared, a jolt of pure, blinding adrenaline exploded through my chest. The photo was looking out from a dark, dusty wooden frame, illuminated by a faint green glow. In the center of the frame was a bed with gray sheets, a modern laptop sitting on a nightstand, and a man lying on his side, holding a glowing smartphone. It was a photo of me. It was a live, high-definition image of my exact bedroom, taken from a perspective inside the open crawl space hatched directly behind my headboard. The timestamp at the bottom corner of the screen read, 2:24 a.m. The current time on my phone's dashboard was exactly 2:24 a.m. My body went completely rigid, my muscles locking in a state of absolute paralysis. I was too terrified to move, too terrified to even turn my head around to look at the wall behind me. Through the absolute silence of the bedroom, I heard a sound that made my heart completely seize. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was the distinct, sharp sound of long fingernails slowly dragging against the interior drywall directly behind my pillow. Then, the small wooden latch of the crawlspace hatch let out a loud, agonizing creak as it was slowly pushed open from the inside. The air in the bedroom instantly plummeted to a freezing temperature. My breath formed a thick, white plume in the air, and my smartphone screen began to flicker violently, the Reddit app glitching out and typing random strings of text into the comment box on its own. He is out, he is out, he is out. A sickening, pungent odor of wet copper and rotten earth poured out from the open hatch, filling the room with the stench of decay. Using every ounce of willpower I possessed, I forced my body to move. I lunged out of the bed, tumbling onto the hardwood floor, and scrambled toward the light switch on the opposite wall. I slapped the plastic panel, but the overhead lights didn't turn on. The supernatural presence had completely drained the electrical current from the room. The only illumination came from the faint, strobing green light of my phone screen on the floor. Through the flashing green light, I looked back at the bed. Emerging from the open crawlspace hatch was a shape that completely fractured my rational mind. It wasn't a human being, but a shifting, translucent manifestation of a shadow figure. Its limbs impossibly long and segmented like an insect, its head completely featureless except for a wide, jagged horizontal slit that mimicked a human grin. It didn't possess eyes, but a pair of glowing, hollow white pinpricks of light were fixed entirely on my position. The entity let out a low, vibrating screech that sounded like a chorus of distorted radio static and tearing metal. The acoustic force was so intense it shattered the glass panels of my bedroom windows, raining silver shards down into the dark yard outside. I didn't stay to fight. I bolted out of the bedroom door, flying down the creaking wooden stairs in the dark, my bare feet hitting the cold steps with a frantic speed. Behind me, I could hear it, the heavy, terrifying sound of something massive yet unnaturally light dragging itself down the staircase walls, bypassing the steps entirely as it pursued me through the dark house. I threw myself against the heavy front door, tearing at the brass deadbolt until it finally clicked open. I sprinted out into the pouring rain, running blindly down the gravel driveway and into the dark cornfields, not stopping until I reached a local sheriff's deputy parked on the highway, 2 miles away. When the authorities inspected the farmhouse the next morning, they found no signs of an intruder, and the crawlspace hatch was closed and bolted from the outside. However, when I logged back into my Reddit account from a motel room later that day, I found that the old thread had been permanently deleted by the site administrators. But I had received a single private message from that same anonymous account. The message contained no text, only a new photo link. I clicked it, and my blood turned into absolute ice. The photo was taken from inside my parked truck at the motel, looking through the rear window at me, sitting inside the diner across the street. Timestamp 5 minutes ago. I abandoned the farmhouse that very day, leaving all my expensive furniture behind. I never use online forums anymore, and whenever I hear a soft scratching sound inside a wall, my chest locks up with a paralyzing dread, because I know that once you open the archive, the shadow never stops updating its feed. Stepping out of a modern corporate elevator onto an unlit, concrete subbasement that isn't listed on the building's directory is a creepy mistake. But your lungs completely seize when the elevator doors slam shut behind you, and the emergency intercom speaker on the wall begins to whisper your darkest childhood secrets in a mocking, distorted chorus. My name is Killian Mercer, and in the early winter of 2024, I took a high-paying overnight cleaning position at the Vanguard Corporate Center, a newly constructed 70-story glass skyscraper located in the commercial heart of downtown Chicago. Because the building was entirely vacant of office workers from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., my shift was a masterclass in modern isolation. A vast expanse of polished marble floors, endless cubicle bays, and silent, darkened hallways that absorbed every sound. My responsibilities were straightforward: maintain the upper executive suites and utilize the central service elevator to transport industrial waste down to the main basement loading docks. It was exactly 3 a.m. on a freezing Friday when the first supernatural anomaly occurred. I had just finished clearing the 64th floor and entered the massive, brushed steel service elevator, pushing the illuminated button for the basement level label B1. The elevator doors slid shut with a heavy mechanical hiss, and the cab began its smooth, silent descent through the core of the skyscraper. I leaned against the metal handrail, watching the digital floor indicator above the door countdown. 40, 30, 20, 10. But instead of slowing down at the basement level, the elevator car suddenly shuddered violently, a loud, metallic grinding sound echoing through the shaft as the cab accelerated downward with an impossible speed. The digital floor indicator began to glitch, cycling through random strings of code and unreadable characters before landing on a single, glowing red symbol, SUB4. The elevator came to a sudden, catastrophic halt that knocked me to my knees, my cleaning supplies scattering across the rubber floor mats. A second later, the heavy steel doors slowly slid open, revealing an unlit, cavernous concrete corridor that didn't exist on any architectural blueprint of the building. The air that poured into the cab was freezing, carrying with it a heavy, damp stench of stagnant river water and ancient, calcified dust. Nervous and confused, assuming it was a technical software malfunction with the building's automation grid, I stepped out onto the cold concrete floor to check for an emergency exit staircase. But the moment my boots cleared the threshold, the elevator doors violently slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the concrete walls. The illuminated call button on the exterior panel instantly died, leaving me plunged into a thick, absolute darkness. The only light came from the faint, dying beam of my tactical flashlight. I swept the beam down the corridor, revealing an endless, repeating sequence of bare concrete pillars and unpainted drywall panels that stretched out into the gloom like a subterranean liminal space. Through the heavy, suffocating silence of the subbasement, a sharp burst of audio static erupted from an old analog intercom speaker mounted on a concrete pillar 20 feet away. The speaker buzzed loudly, the glass housing vibrating against the stone. Then, a voice broke through the white noise that made my hands instantly begin to tremble. It was a chorus of multi-layered children's voices, speaking in a flat, rhythmic monotone cadence that echoed through the dark corridor. As they spoke, a cold sweat broke out across my neck. They were reciting the exact words of a private journal entry I had written and burned when I was 10 years old. A childhood secret I had never spoken aloud to a single living soul. The shadow under the stairs knows your name, Killian. It's been waiting 40 years for you to come down. The intercom voice giggled, the sound distorted and pitched down into a wet, mechanical drone before returning to dead static. A wave of pure, paralyzing adrenaline flooded my veins. I spun around, desperately battering my fists against the brushed steel elevator doors, screaming for help into the empty shaft. But the metal remained cold and unresponsive. Suddenly, the temperature in the concrete corridor plummeted even further, my breath forming thick, ragged plumes in the air. I looked down at the concrete floor, illuminated by my flashlight beam. Frost was rapidly blooming across the gray stone, spreading outward from the dark corners of the corridor like a living network of ice. Through the frost, I heard a sound that made my muscles completely lock up. Squish, squish, squish. It was the distinct, heavy sound of wet footsteps slowly moving toward me from the deep darkness at the end of the hall. I raised my flashlight, my hand shaking so violently the beam danced across the ceiling. Emerging from the shadows between the concrete pillars was a shape that completely fractured my rational mind. It was a tall, fluid silhouette of a shadow figure, its form blacker than the surrounding night, shifting and expanding like a pool of living oil. It didn't possess eyes or a mouth, but within its dark, gaseous architecture, dozens of translucent white pinpricks of light began to open, all of them focused entirely on my head. The entity didn't walk. It glitched across the concrete floor with an impossible, jerky speed that covered 10 yards in a single microsecond, leaving a trail of black, frozen moisture in its wake. Primal survival instinct overrode my paralysis. I turned around and ran blindly down the opposing corridor, my boots slamming against the hard stone as I navigated the maze of pillars. Behind me, I could hear it, the deafening, mechanical screech of the entity moving through the space, knocking over metal utility pipes and shattering the concrete panels with its sheer acoustic force. As I sprinted past the utility alcove, I noticed a small wall-mounted ventilation hatch that led to the upper elevator shafts. I didn't hesitate. I raised my heavy iron flashlight, smashed the metal grate off the wall, and squeezed my body into the tight, dark concrete duct, crawling forward with a frantic, animalistic speed. The freezing black mist of the entity surged into the vent behind me, nipping at my heels like cold teeth. I crawled through the narrow space for what felt like miles until I finally burst through an access hatch onto the active basement loading dock, where the morning security team found me shivering and covered in black dust at 5:30 a.m. I still don't know if I truly escaped that building. What would you have done if that elevator doors slammed shut behind you? Tell me in the comments. I handed in my uniform that very morning, refusing to ever step foot in a corporate skyscraper again. I work in open-air landscaping now, and whenever I enter an elevator and see a glitched floor indicator screen, my blood turns into absolute ice, because I know that beneath the modern glass and luxury, the unlisted channels are always waiting to open.